When he left the orphanage, they told him he inherited a worthless silo, a concrete ghost on a forgotten patch of land. What he discovered inside would change everything. If you've ever felt like the world wrote you off before you even got started, I need you to stick around for this. Hit that subscribe button, because this story is for anyone who's ever had to find their own way home. The day I turned 18 was the day I ceased to be a line item in the state budget. There was no cake, no party, just a cardboard box and a handshake from Mr. Henderson, the facility director, a man whose hands always felt like damp paper towels. The box contained the sum total of my 17 years and 364 days in the system. 3 pairs of jeans, a handful of t-shirts that were never quite mine, a worn paperback copy of a book about a boy who discovers he's a wizard, and a manila envelope sealed with a strip of yellowing tape. "Your effects, Leo," Mr. Henderson had said, his voice carrying the same flat, institutional echo as the hallways. Effects. The words sounded like something you'd list after a natural disaster. I stood on the curb outside the Northgate Youth Authority, the same curb where I'd been dropped off as a 6-year-old with a social worker who promised my mom would be back soon. She never came back. The institution had been my home, but it was never a home. It was a holding pattern. A place of beige walls, disinfectant smells, and the quiet, simmering anger of kids who knew they were disposable. Now, the holding pattern was over. I was free, which felt a lot like being untethered in a hurricane. I had $412 in a state-issued debit card, a bus ticket to a city I'd never seen, and this box. The weight of it was nothing, but it felt impossibly heavy. The bus wasn't due for another hour. I sat on the hard concrete bench, the spring air feeling thin and sharp in my lungs. I pulled out the manila envelope. My name was typed on the front, Leo Vance. Below it, a case number that had been my real name for 12 years. Inside was a sheaf of papers held together with a rusty paper clip. My birth certificate, a flimsy copy, social security card, and at the back, a thick, folded document printed on heavy, cream-colored paper. It was a deed. A last will and testament, filed by a man named Alistair Vance. My grandfather. I had a vague, watery memory of him, a man with hands like old leather and a smell of sawdust and pipe tobacco. He'd disappeared from my life around the same time my mother did. According to the legal jargon, he had bequeathed to me, his only living heir, his sole property, Lot 7B, County Road 114, Township of Grayling. The property consisted of 12 acres of land and 1 agricultural silo, decommissioned. The document was dated 6 years ago. He'd been gone that long. No one had ever told me. A worthless silo. That's what Ms. Albright, my final caseworker, had called it when she'd gone over my transitional plan a week earlier. She was a kind woman, perpetually tired, who spoke in the gentle, pragmatic tones of someone who had seen too many kids like me spit out by the system with nothing. "Look, Leo," she'd said, tapping the file with a pen. "Your grandfather likely meant well, but this isn't a windfall. The taxes on the property are delinquent. 3 years' worth. The land is zoned agricultural in a primarily industrial overflow area. It's not desirable, and the structure itself is a liability. It's a tear down." She'd pushed a business card across the table. "This is a commercial real estate agent who handles distressed properties. He might be able to get you a few thousand for the land value from the aggregate company next door. They use the area for gravel storage. It's better than nothing. Better than nothing." That was the unofficial motto of my life. The foster home before this was better than the one before that. The state-issued shoes were better than no shoes. A few $1,000s for my only inheritance was better than nothing. I folded the deed and slid it back into the envelope. The bus hissed to a stop in front of me, its doors sighing open like a tired beast. I picked up my box of effects and stepped on, leaving the only home I'd ever known behind without a single look back. There was nothing there worth seeing. I found a seat by a grimy window and watched the gray building of the Youth Authority shrink until it was just another concrete box in a world full of them. I didn't know where I was going, not really, but I knew I wasn't going to call that real estate agent. Not yet. The idea of selling the only thing anyone had ever intentionally left me, even a worthless silo, felt like a final surrender. And I was tired of surrendering. The transitional housing was a single room in a downtown building that smelled of stale cigarettes and boiled cabbage. The window looked out onto a brick wall. For the first 2 days, I barely left the room. The freedom was a physical weight. In the institution, every minute of my day was scheduled. Wake up, breakfast, school, chores, recreation, dinner, lights out. Out here, the hours stretched into a vast, terrifying emptiness. The silence was the worst part. It wasn't peaceful. It was loud, a roaring in my ears that had been drowned out for years by the constant noise of slammed doors, shouting boys, and blaring televisions. Here, alone, the silence was just the sound of my own thoughts circling. On the third day, I woke up knowing I couldn't stay there. The room was just a smaller, lonelier version of the institution. I pulled out the deed again and spread it on the thin blanket. County Road 114, Township of Grayling. I found it on a map on the library computer. It was 150 miles north, a place where the map turned from a dense web of city streets into scattered lines and large patches of green. It was in the middle of nowhere. It was perfect. I spent $84 on a bus ticket heading north. The journey was a slow bleed from gray to green. The cityscape of concrete and steel softened into sprawling suburbs, then fractured into strip malls and gas stations, and finally dissolved into open country. The bus was mostly empty, just me and a few older people who looked as weary as I felt. I watched the landscape scroll by. Fields of green corn, punctuated by weathered barns leaning against the wind. Clumps of trees that thickened into dense forests. The sky seemed to get bigger, wider, a vast blue canvas that made me feel even smaller than I already did. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was moving towards something that was mine, even if it was just a column of rotting concrete. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. What if Ms. Albright was right? What if it was just a heap of junk on a poisoned patch of land? What if I was trading a lonely room for an even lonelier field? The questions were a low hum of anxiety under the rumble of the bus engine. But for the first time, the questions felt like my own. The fear was mine. The hope, however fragile, was also mine. That felt like a start. The bus dropped me at a crossroads with a single blinking yellow light. The driver grunted, Grayling, and I stepped out into a wall of humid air thick with the smell of damp earth and cut grass. There was a gas station, a diner with a faded sign, and a post office. That was it. The road stretching out before me, County Road 114, was a two-lane strip of blacktop that disappeared into a tunnel of overhanging trees. There were no sidewalks. According to the map, my grandfather's property was about 2 miles down this road. I shifted the backpack on my shoulders. It held everything I now owned in the world, a change of clothes, a bottle of water, the box of crackers I'd bought at the bus station, and the manila envelope with the deed. I started walking. The sun was hot on the back of my neck. Cars were infrequent, roaring past in a brief gust of wind and exhaust, their drivers staring at the kid walking along the shoulder of the road. I probably looked like a runaway. In a way, I was. I was running away from the person the state had tried to make me, and running toward, well, I didn't know what. A ghost, maybe. A memory of a man with leathery hands. After walking for what felt like an eternity, my legs aching and my shirt soaked with sweat, I saw it. The silo stood back from the road, partially hidden by a curtain of overgrown willow trees. It was exactly as I'd pictured, only more so. Taller, more desolate. It was a giant, gray cylinder, streaked with rust-colored tiers that ran from the dome top all the way to the base. The metal ladder that scaled its side was skeletal, missing rungs like broken teeth. The land around it was a riot of weeds and wildflowers, a wild, untamed meadow that lapped at the silo's concrete foundation. Next to it, a sprawling industrial lot was piled high with mountains of gravel and sand, just as Ms. Albright had described. A chain-link fence separated the two properties, and it made my small plot of land look like a forgotten island of green in a sea of gray dust. I pushed through the tall grass, the stalks scratching at my jeans. There was no house, no barn, just the silo. It loomed over me, silent and imposing, like a monument to some forgotten god of agriculture. It was ugly and beautiful all at once. It was mine. Getting inside was the first challenge. The main access door was a huge, sliding panel of corrugated steel, rusted shut at the bottom. I pushed and pulled, my hands raw against the flaking metal, but it wouldn't budge. It was sealed by years of neglect and weather. I walked the perimeter, my heart sinking. Was this it? A 2-mile walk to stare at a giant I couldn't even get into? Then I saw it. A smaller, man-sized door on the opposite side, almost completely obscured by a thicket of thorny bushes. It took me 20 minutes to clear a path with a heavy branch, my arms and face getting scratched in the process. This door was heavy steel, with a simple but sturdy lock. Of course, it was locked. I sat down on the ground, breathing heavily, feeling a wave of despair wash over me. It was a stupid idea, a fool's errand. I should have just called the real estate agent. I was about to give up when my eyes fell on a loose stone in the concrete foundation, just to the right of the door. The color was slightly off, the mortar around it crumbling. On a whim, I pried at it with my fingers. It was loose. I worked it back and forth, and with a gritty scrape, it came free. Tucked into the hollow space behind it was a small, oilskin pouch. Inside was a single, heavy, old-fashioned iron key. A jolt went through me, a shock of connection. He'd left it for me. My grandfather had left me a key. The key turned in the lock with a groan of protest, the sound of metal grinding against years of rust and disuse. It took all my weight to turn it, but finally, there was a loud, satisfying clunk. The door was still stuck. I had to put my shoulder into it, pushing with everything I had. It opened inward with a deep, echoing shriek that seemed to go all the way up to the top of the silo. I stumbled into the darkness, blinking as my eyes adjusted. The air inside was cool and still, thick with the smell of dust, old concrete, and something else, something faintly sweet, like dried hay. Light streamed in from a few high, narrow slits in the concrete walls, cutting through the gloom in dusty golden shafts. The space was enormous, cavernous. My footsteps echoed on the concrete floor. Looking up, I felt a wave of vertigo. The silo was a hollow tube soaring 100 feet into the air, culminating in a small circle of light from an opening in the roof. It was like standing at the bottom of a well. The sheer scale of it was breathtaking. Most of the space was empty, a vast circle of dusty concrete. But in one corner, shielded from the main door, was a small, sectioned-off area. It looked like someone had lived here. There was a simple wooden cot with a rotted mattress, a small table made from stacked cinder blocks and a plank of wood, and a rusty wood-burning stove with a crooked stovepipe that snaked up the wall. It was a makeshift camp, a hidden refuge. And sitting next to the cot, like a treasure chest in a forgotten tomb, was a dark green, metal footlocker. It was military style, with heavy latches on the front. I knelt in front of it, my heart pounding. This was it. This had to be why he'd left me the key. The latches were stiff, but not locked. I pried them open, the metal screeching in the silence. I lifted the heavy lid. I don't know what I was expecting. Gold bars. A pile of cash. Something that would solve all my problems. But the footlocker was empty, save for a stack of envelopes tied together with a faded piece of twine. They were addressed to me. Leo, my name, written in a strong, slanted hand. I sat on the dusty floor, the shafts of light illuminating the dancing dust motes around me, and I carefully untied the twine. There were at least a dozen letters, the paper thick and aged to the color of old ivory. I took the one from the top. The date on it was from just after my 6th birthday, right after I'd been sent to Northgate. My hands were trembling as I unfolded the single sheet of paper. The ink was slightly faded, but the handwriting was clear. My dear Leo, it began. If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and you are a man. I am sorry for so many things. I am sorry I could not be there to watch you grow. I am sorry you have spent your childhood in a place with no love. I need you to know that it was not because I didn't want you. It was because I had to protect you. I had to read that line 3 times. Protect me? I had spent 12 years feeling abandoned, thrown away. The word protect didn't compute. It was from a different language, a different world. Your father, the letter continued, was a good man at his core, but he fell in with some very bad people. He got into a debt he could not pay, not with money. They were criminals, Leo, violent men. After your mother's accident, they came looking for him, and they made it clear that they would take you as payment. I couldn't let that happen. I tried to handle it. I sold my house, my business, everything I had, to pay them off. But it wasn't enough. They were a cancer that couldn't be cut out. The only way to keep you safe was to make you disappear. To make you invisible. The words hit me like a physical blow. I leaned back against the cold concrete wall, the letter shaking in my hand. A story I had told myself for 12 years. The story of an unwanted child, a burden passed off to the state. was cracking apart. Invisible. He had made me invisible. The state system wasn't just a place I'd been dumped. It had been a hiding place. The anonymity I hated so much, the feeling of being just a number, had been a shield. I bought this old silo and the land around it with the last of my money. The letter went on. It's not much, but it's ours. It's off the grid. No one looks twice at it. I lived here for a while, watching, making sure they weren't still looking for you. I couldn't risk contacting you. A single phone call, a single letter to the youth authority, could have led them right to you. My silence was your protection. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. I hope, someday, you can forgive me for it. This place, this silo, it was my promise to you. A promise that one day you would have a place to stand, a piece of the world that was yours, free and clear. It may not look like much, but it is a foundation. What you build on it is up to you. This is the first of many letters. They will tell you the whole story, and they will show you what else I have left for you. It is not a fortune, but it is a start. Be careful. Be strong. Know that you were loved. Always. Your grandfather, Alistair. I let the letter fall into my lap. The silence in the silo was different now. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the ghost of my grandfather's voice, with the weight of his words. Loved. Protected. Foundation. These words were strangers to me. I looked around at the dusty, cavernous space. The crumbling cot, the rusty stove. It didn't look like love. It looked like poverty. It looked like desperation. But the letter felt like truth. A deep, painful, earth-shattering truth. I sat there for a long time, as the sun shifted and the golden shafts of light moved across the floor. I cried. I cried for the 6-year-old boy dropped off on a curb. I cried for the grandfather who had hidden himself away in this concrete tube, watching over a grandson he couldn't touch. And I cried for the 18-year-old man sitting on a dusty floor, holding a story that had just broken his life in two, wondering if he could ever put the pieces back together again. That night, I didn't leave. The thought of going back to the city, to that soulless room, was unbearable. I had a thin sleeping bag in my pack. I rolled it out on the cot, the old mattress springs groaning in protest. The sun went down, and the silo was plunged into a profound darkness, deeper than any I had ever experienced. The only light was a pale circle of stars visible through the opening in the roof. The air grew cold. I lay there, shivering, my mind racing. Every belief I had about myself was built on the idea of being abandoned. It was the bedrock of my identity. Who was I, if not the boy no one wanted? The anger came next, a hot, bitter wave. Anger at my father for getting into trouble. Anger at the men who had hunted him. Anger at my grandfather for not finding another way. And anger at myself for being so quick to believe the worst. It was easier to believe I was worthless than to believe a story this complicated, this painful. I thought about Ms. Albright's advice. Sell the land. Take the money. Run. It was the sensible thing to do. The few $1,000s would be a lifeline. I could get a real apartment, find a job, start a normal life. That was the smart play. But the letters in the footlocker felt like an anchor. They were a history, a legacy. Selling this place would mean selling that story, treating it as worthless. It would mean agreeing with the world that this place, and the sacrifice it represented, meant nothing. Lying there in the cold, in the dark, I felt like I was at a crossroads. One path led back to the world I knew, the world of quiet desperation and just getting by. The other path led deeper into this silo, deeper into my grandfather's story. It was an unknown path, and it was terrifying. But it was the only one that felt like it might lead somewhere real. You know, if you've made it this far into my story, it's probably because some part of it resonates with you. Maybe you've also felt lost, or like the story you were told about yourself wasn't the whole truth. It's a lonely feeling, but I want you to know you're not alone in it. This community we're building here is for people who get it. If you feel that, I'd be so grateful if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It tells me that these stories matter, that our stories matter. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever discovered a secret that changed how you saw your entire life? I read every single one, and your stories give me strength. Now let's get back to that cold, dark night in the silo, because what I found the next morning changed the game completely. The sun woke me, a single, brilliant beam of light shining straight down from the opening in the roof, like a spotlight on a stage. The dust motes danced in the beam. The chill of the night was gone, replaced by a growing warmth. I felt different. calmer. The emotional storm of the night had passed, leaving behind a quiet resolve. I wasn't going to run. I was going to see this through. I sat up and reached for the stack of letters. I picked the next one in the pile. It was dated a year after the first. Leo, it began, I hope you are well. I spend my days watching the gravel pit next door. They are expanding. They eye this little piece of land like a wolf eyes a lamb. They do not know its value, not its real value. The value of a place is not in the dirt, but in the freedom it provides. In this letter, I want to talk about foundations. The foundation of this silo is 10 feet of solid concrete. It is strong. It is deep. I built other things to be strong and deep, too. The letter was cryptic. It talked about the importance of looking beneath the surface. People see a ruin, he wrote. I see a fortress. People see an empty floor. I see a hidden cellar. My eyes darted around the concrete floor. A hidden cellar? I stood up and began to pace the circumference of the silo, my boots kicking up puffs of dust. I tapped the floor with my heel. It was solid concrete everywhere. Hard, unyielding. I went back to the letter, reading the words again. Where the light does not touch, there you will find the lock. I looked at the floor in the center, where the morning sun was now a bright circle. Then I looked at the edges, deep in the shadows against the curved wall. I started in the small living area my grandfather had built. I got on my hands and knees, running my hands over the cold concrete, feeling for any imperfection, any seam. Nothing. I moved around the entire perimeter of the silo, my knees getting sore, my hands covered in grime. I found nothing. I was about to give up, thinking maybe he was speaking metaphorically, when my hand brushed against the base of the wood-burning stove. The stove was cold, of course, but it was anchored to the floor with 4 heavy bolts. I pushed at it. It was solid, but as I ran my hand along the floor behind it, in the deepest shadow, my fingers caught on something. A line. A perfectly straight, hairline crack in the concrete that I hadn't seen. It formed a perfect square, about 3 feet by 3 feet, tucked away behind the stove. I looked closer. In one corner of the square, almost invisible, was a small, recessed metal ring, flush with the floor. My breath caught in my throat. I hooked my fingers into the ring and pulled. It was incredibly heavy. I had to brace my feet against the base of the stove and pull with my entire body. With a deep, sucking sound of displaced air, the square of concrete lifted. It was a concrete plug, a lid, thick and heavy. And beneath it was a dark, square hole and a wooden ladder leading down. The air that rose from the opening was cool and smelled of damp earth and cellar cold. I hesitated for only a moment. I grabbed the flashlight from my backpack, clicked it on, and swung my legs over the edge. The ladder was sturdy, the wood old but sound. I descended about 10 feet into the darkness. The flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing a small, square room. It was a root cellar, dug out of the earth beneath the silo's foundation. The walls were lined with rough-hewn wooden shelves, but they weren't stocked with jars of preserves. They were stocked with supplies. There were dozens of sealed, military-grade MRE packs, meals ready to eat. There were containers of purified water. There were boxes of batteries, first aid kits, warm blankets sealed in plastic, work gloves, tools, and a brand new pair of work boots in what looked like my size. It was a survival cache, enough to last one person for months. My grandfather hadn't just left me a story. He had left me a lifeline. On the central shelf, right at eye level, was another metal box. This one was smaller, an old ammunition can. I lifted it down. It was heavy. I carried it over to the base of the ladder, into the faint light from the silo above, and opened it. The top layer was filled with more letters. Beneath them, bundled in oilcloth, were stacks of cash. Not a fortune, but more money than I had ever seen in my life. I counted it, my hands shaking. $10,000. In 20s and 50s. It was enough to pay the back taxes. It was enough to buy a cheap truck. It was enough to live on for a year if I was careful. It was a start. A real start. Beneath the money was a small, leather-bound journal. I opened it. It was my grandfather's. The first page had a photo tucked into it. A young man and woman, smiling, holding a baby. My parents. And me. I had never seen a picture of them before. I traced the outline of my mother's face, a ghost I had only known through vague, childish memories. She looked happy. They both did. I sank to the floor of the cellar, the ammo can in my lap, and I began to read the journal. It wasn't like the letters. The letters were for me. The journal was for him. It detailed the years after my parents were gone. It was a log of his pain, his fear, and his unwavering determination to protect me. He wrote about trailing the men who were after my father, learning their habits, their connections. He wrote about the agonizing decision to place me in the state's care, describing it as cutting off my own arm to save my body. He chronicled his lonely life in the silo, watching the gravel company's trucks come and go, patching the roof, building the cellar, stockpiling the supplies, all for a future he wasn't sure he would live to see. He wrote about me. He had followed my life from a distance, getting what little information he could from a sympathetic contact he had in the social services system. He knew I'd been moved from one foster home to another. He knew I'd ended up at Northgate. Each entry was filled with a quiet, desperate love. One entry, from about 2 years ago, stood out. "The last of them is gone," he wrote. "The man who held my son's debt, the one they called the collector, is dead. Heart attack. The crew he ran with scattered to the winds. The threat is over. It is finally over. I can bring the boy home. I will go tomorrow." But the next entry was dated a week later, the handwriting shaky. "The doctor was not kind. The cancer in my lungs has spread. They give me months. I have run my race, and I will not see the finish line. I will not get to see my boy's face as a man. I have failed him in the end." He hadn't failed. He had won. He had outlasted the threat. He had secured this place for me. He had given me a history, a foundation, and a future. He just hadn't lived long enough to hand it to me himself. I closed the journal, the weight of his sacrifice settling over me not as a burden, but as a gift. A profound, heartbreaking gift. The next few days were a blur of work. I used the money from the cellar to take a taxi back to the nearest town. I went to the county courthouse and paid the 3 years of back taxes. The woman at the counter looked at me, a kid in dusty clothes paying a multi-thousand-dollar bill in cash, with suspicion. But the receipt she gave me was one of the most beautiful things I had ever seen. This land was mine, free and clear. I went to a used car lot and bought an old, beat-up, but reliable pickup truck for $2,000. I got a driver's license. I opened a bank account. I bought groceries, cleaning supplies, a new mattress, and a propane camp stove. Each purchase felt like a victory, a small act of building a life. I drove my truck back to the silo, the bed filled with the beginnings of a home, and felt a surge of pride I had never known. Then, the outside world intruded. Tucked into the handle of the silo door was a crisp, white envelope. It was from a company called Granite Ridge Development. The letter inside was polite, professional, and predatory. It referenced the unimproved nature of my property and its potential environmental liabilities. It made a generous, as-is offer of $5,000 for the 12 acres, citing their need to expand their adjacent aggregate storage facility. $5,000. After everything I had learned, the offer was a profound insult. It was an attempt to erase my grandfather's story, to pave over his legacy with gravel. They saw a worthless silo. They saw a problem to be bulldozed. They didn't see the foundation. They didn't see the fortress. They didn't see the home. I crumpled the letter in my fist. Ms. Albright's voice echoed in my head. "It's better than nothing." She was wrong. This place wasn't nothing. It was everything. I had a choice. A clear one. I could take their money. $10,000 from my grandfather, $5,000 from them. $15,000. I could walk away from this cold, dusty silo and start over somewhere new, somewhere comfortable. No one would blame me. It would be the logical, sensible path. Or I could stay. I could fight for this small patch of wild green land. I could pour my life, my sweat, and the money my grandfather left me into this place. I could make his fortress my home. It would be hard. It would be lonely. The developers wouldn't just go away. They would push. But as I stood there, in the long shadow of the silo, I knew there was no real choice at all. Walking away would be the real abandonment. It would be abandoning him and everything he did for me. I smoothed out the crumpled letter, took a pen from my backpack, and wrote a single word on it in big, bold letters. And the next day, I mailed it back. The weeks that followed turned into months. I worked from sunup to sundown. I hauled out the years of debris from the silo. I scrubbed the concrete walls. I patched the small leaks in the roof with tar. I used the tools my grandfather had left to build sturdy shelves, a proper table, and a frame for my new bed. I bought a small generator for electricity and a large water tank. I installed a composting toilet. Slowly, painstakingly, the cavernous, empty space began to feel like a home. It was Spartan, but it was mine. I learned to live with the rhythms of the land. The sound of the wind whistling around the top of the silo. The way the light changed throughout the day. The cry of hawks circling overhead. I was more alone than I had ever been in my life. But for the first time, I wasn't lonely. The developers didn't give up. A man in a suit came by, driving a shiny black sedan that looked ridiculous parked in the tall grass. His name was Mr. Davies. He was smooth and friendly, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He doubled their offer. 10,000. Son, he said, leaning against his car. Let's be realistic. What are you going to do with this thing? It's a ruin. You're living in a grain silo. Take the money. Get a real start in life. I just looked at him. I already have a real start, I said, and went back inside. He came back a week later with a warning. He mentioned zoning ordinances, building codes, public nuisance complaints. He was trying to intimidate me, to bury me in the same kind of systemic pressure that had haunted my family for years. But my grandfather had taught me about foundations. Mine was strong. This is my home, I told him. You're trespassing. Please leave. He left, his smile gone, replaced by a tight, angry line. I knew it wasn't over, but I also knew I wasn't going to break. I found a part-time job at the gas station at the crossroads, pumping gas and stocking shelves. The owner, a gruff old man named Sal, didn't ask a lot of questions. He just saw a kid who was willing to work hard. The people in the small community started to know me. The woman at the post office, the waitress at the diner. They were wary at first of the strange boy living in the old silo. But slowly, they began to see me not as an outsider, but as a neighbor. Sal taught me how to fix a flat tire. The waitress, a woman named Carol, started sending me home with leftover pie. I was building a community, one small connection at a time. I was putting down roots in the soil my grandfather had saved for me. One evening, after my shift, I was sitting at the table I'd built, reading my grandfather's journal again, when there was a knock on the heavy steel door. It was the first time I'd had a visitor. I opened it to find Ms. Albright standing there, looking out of place in her sensible city clothes. She looked at me, then at the lit interior of the silo behind me, a look of utter astonishment on her face. "Leo," she said, as if she was seeing a ghost. "I was in the area for another case. I had to see. The real estate agent called me, said you'd turned down a significant offer. I was worried about you." I stepped aside and let her in. She walked into the center of the silo, her mouth slightly open, taking in the clean floor, the simple furniture, the warmth from the wood stove. "You live here," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said. "It's my home." She walked over to the table and saw the open journal, the photo of my parents tucked inside. She looked at me, her professional composure finally cracking. "His file was sealed," she said softly. "Your grandfather's. He petitioned the court. Said it was for your protection. We never knew the details, just that he'd relinquished his rights. We all assumed he just didn't want you." I shook my head. "He wanted me more than anything," I said. "He just wanted me to be safe more." I told her everything. About the letters, the seller, the money, the developers. I told her the whole story. She sat at my table, in the home I had built inside a ruin, and she listened. When I was finished, there were tears in her eyes. "All these years," she whispered. "All these years, we tell ourselves these stories to make sense of things. The deadbeat parents. The grandparents who can't be bothered. We see the file, not the person." She looked at me, and for the first time, I felt like she was truly seeing me. "Leo Vance, not a case number. He left you more than a silo, didn't he?" she said. "He left you a choice. And you made the right one." Her visit was a turning point. It was validation from the very system that had defined me for so long. She made some calls. She put me in touch with a pro bono legal aid service that specialized in land disputes. They sent Granite Ridge Development a cease and desist letter that was a work of art. The harassment stopped. They still own the gravel pit next door, their mountains of gray dust a constant reminder of the world that sees value only in what can be bought and sold. But they leave me alone. My island of green is safe. It's been 2 years now. The silo is a real home. I have solar panels on the roof for power and a well for water. I planted a garden. I'm taking online courses at the local community college, studying architectural design. I have this idea, this dream, of converting old, abandoned structures like this one into affordable, sustainable housing. of taking things the world has thrown away and giving them a new purpose. Just like my grandfather did for me. I still read his letters. His words are the foundation of my life. He taught me that inheritance isn't about money. It's about story. It's about the sacrifices people make for love. He taught me that home isn't a building. It's a place where you are safe, where you are known, and where you have the freedom to build your own future. My life isn't perfect. It's quiet. It's simple, but it's mine. Every nail I hammered, every seed I planted, is a testament to the man who saved me with a worthless silo. He gave me a second chance, and I'm trying every day to be worthy of it. So that's my story. It's the story of how I found a home in the last place anyone would ever look. And it brings me to a final question for you. What does the word home mean to you? Is it a place? A person? A feeling? I want you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories, your perspectives, are what make this channel more than just stories. They make it a community. If my journey meant something to you today, please consider subscribing and becoming a part of that community. Because we all have a story, and every
Okay. Goron power. Yeah. It like the rollout is very Goron coded for sure. Also the face too, Ellie. Like I know it's the Ditto face, but something about it makes it feel like very Goron coded. Okay. Oh, thank God that's easy to do. All right. Oh God, of course we fell. There we go. Apparently there's still a lot more ore on this level. Okay, I think the plan is to eat as much hamburger steak as we can here, get as much Poke Metal as we can, and then we'll head back home and bring you two with us. Honestly, I can't believe we found our first legendary. That's so cool. Honestly, already a good stream. We found our first legendary. We had 2 evolutions move in back to back. Imagine doing all that and your pockets being full all the time. Oh God.